Welcome to Timeless Dreams. Subscribe, relax, and drift into sleep with the gentle stories of history. Take a slow, deep breath and let it out. Feel your shoulders drop just a little. Let your jaw unclench. Tonight, you can let go of the day that's been chasing you because you're safe here, for now. But in the world we're about to step into, safety is never guaranteed. This is not the Rome of marble postcards and heroic statues. This is the Rome you'd have to survive in. And survival here is earned, not given. So as we drift together into this story, keep breathing slowly. Let your muscles loosen, your mind open. The fire will keep burning softly in the background, but the world beyond that glow is gritty, loud, and unforgiving. Hey there. Welcome back. Tonight we're going somewhere both beautiful and brutal. A place of marble arches and muddy streets, of soaring aqueducts and suffocating crowds. A world where emperors feast in gold-lined halls while the poor sleep under collapsing roofs. Tonight, you're not Julius Caesar. You're not Augustus, not a general, not even a gladiator. You're just you, dropped, unprepared, into the beating heart of the Roman Empire, a world of sandals, sewage, and state-sponsored cruelty. Before we begin, dim your lights. Maybe let a fan hum quietly in the background, or keep that soft crackle of the fire close by. Take another deep breath. Let your body sink a little deeper into whatever you're resting on, because this journey is going to get uncomfortable. You might close your eyes now and try to imagine the streets of Rome, not the ones in glossy textbooks, where every stone is polished and every toga spotless, but the Rome that wakes before dawn, restless, grimy, alive. You open your eyes to the sound of yelling chickens and a baby crying somewhere down the hall. Your first sight is not a marble column, but the cracked wall of a tiny insula, a Roman apartment block. The air in here smells faintly of smoke, mold, and the sour tang of too many unwashed bodies. The ceiling above you looks like it might come down if someone drops a jug upstairs, and they probably will. Your room, if you can call it that, is the size of a walk-in closet. No window, just a small hole in the wall that lets in a sliver of light, the occasional pigeon, and whatever noise the street throws your way. The mattress is nothing more than a sack of straw, alive with tiny, unwelcome tenants. Your blanket? Damp wool and the faint, lingering scent of regret. You own not much. A clay cup. A single tunic, worn and patched until it's more thread than fabric. Maybe a wooden comb, if you've been lucky or frugal. There's no kitchen here. No bath. No toilet. Your chamber pot sits silently in the corner, a reminder that sooner or later you'll have to carry it down the steep, creaking stairs to empty it into the gutter below, a process requiring both balance and luck, unless you want to join the other morning offerings in the street. The walls are thin, paper thin. You hear everything. Your neighbor coughing, muttering prayers, arguing with his wife, and sometimes not arguing with his wife. Every sound seeps through, mixing with the steady hum of the city outside. Somewhere below, a baker is already working, the smell of fresh bread tempting but far out of reach for you. In the distance, a centurion's voice booms as he drills a group of soldiers. Someone's shouting about figs. Someone else is yelling about fish guts. And you? You're just sitting up, scratching at an itch you'd rather not identify, and wondering how you'll survive another day here. You shuffle to the doorway, ducking slightly under the warped frame, and begin the descent down the insula's treacherous staircase. The wood groans with each step. The air grows thicker, warmer, heavier. Somewhere in the shadows, a rat scurries, vanishing into a crack in the plaster. Your first order of business, the latrina, Rome's public toilet. And it is not the kind of place you visit for comfort. The latrina is an open stone bench, lined with holes. No walls, no stalls, just people sitting shoulder to shoulder, going about their business while discussing politics, grain prices, or the latest scandal in the Senate. Privacy? A concept for poets. Beneath the bench runs a shallow channel of water, carrying away the city's collective shame. And then there's the tersorium, a communal sponge on a stick, rinsed in a bucket of vinegar between uses. In theory, sanitary. In practice, well, the less you think about it, the better. You do what you have to do, trying not to make eye contact with the man across from you who is chewing olives far too intently. Then you rinse your hands, not with soap because there is none, but with whatever water remains in the communal basin. Breakfast comes next. Don't expect much. Panis rusticus, coarse bread baked yesterday, dense enough to double as a weapon, washed down with watered wine because coffee hasn't been invented yet, and drinking plain water here is a gamble. If you're lucky, maybe you have a smear of garum, fermented fish sauce, to spread on your bread. If not, it's just dry crumbs and the faint taste of envy as you watch someone else buy honey cakes from a street vendor. And then, work. Rome is built on labor, and you are part of that foundation. Whether you carry bricks for a new bathhouse, sweep streets, haul water, or fire clay pots in a smoky workshop, the work is backbreaking, unrelenting, and rarely rewarded. The tools are crude, the hours are long, the foreman's voice is loud, and the pay is barely enough to keep you fed until tomorrow. By midday, the streets are a living thing. Loud, crowded, unpredictable. Wagons clatter past. Merchants shout in a dozen dialects. Goats dart between children playing in the dust. Somewhere, a fight breaks out. Somewhere else, a politician parades with trumpets blaring. The smell of roasting meat mingles with the stench of the gutters. Above it all, the sun bakes everything in a haze of heat. This is the Rome you live in. A place where beauty and squalor stand side by side, where marble temples rise above streets slick with filth, where the empire's might means nothing if you can't make rent on your tiny, crumbling room, and it is only morning. So tonight, as you drift deeper into this story, remember, this is not the Rome of Hollywood. This is the Rome you'd have to survive in, and survival here is never guaranteed. Take another breath. Let your muscles loosen. We're just getting started. The sun has barely crept above the tiled rooftops, and already the city hums with a restlessness that feels ancient. It's a rhythm older than any emperor, a pulse set by trade, survival, and the endless appetite of the empire. You step out from the shadow of your insula and into the Roman street, and immediately the heat feels heavier, thicker, as though the stone buildings themselves have stored yesterday's sun and are eager to share it with you again. The paving stones underfoot are worn smooth by centuries of sandals, chariot wheels, and the padded paws of stray dogs. Between them, rainwater has mixed with dirt, ash, and less pleasant substances, creating a slick, dark film that clings to your soles. You take care with each step. Slipping here isn't just embarrassing. It could mean an injury you can't afford to have. In a city without proper hospitals for the poor, a twisted ankle is the difference between eating and starving. Merchants are already shouting, their voices bouncing between the narrow walls like echoes in a canyon. A man selling figs bellows the sweetness of his wares, while a fishmonger just across the way counterattacks with offers of the freshest catch, though the smell suggests otherwise. Somewhere, the metallic clang of a blacksmith's hammer keeps steady time with the chaos, like a heartbeat of industry. You move through this current of humanity, brushing past cloaks, baskets, and the occasional goat tethered to a doorway. The city smells of bread, sweat, smoke, and livestock, all blending into a scent that is uniquely Rome, as unavoidable as the very air you breathe. As you walk, you pass a group of slaves unloading amphorae of wine from a creaking cart. Their movements are efficient, practiced, their eyes lowered to avoid drawing attention. Above them, on a balcony, a woman leans over the railing, shaking crumbs from a cloth, sending them tumbling into the street below. Crumbs that vanish almost instantly as a pair of pigeons dive for them. You can feel the weight of the city pressing in from all sides. Every archway, every mosaic, every cracked wall carries the silent knowledge that Rome is a city of extremes, of gilded wealth and deep poverty, of divine beauty and desperate struggle. At the corner, you hear the faint creak of wooden wheels. A cart approaches, pulled by a mule with a coat the color of ash. The driver, an older man with skin like tanned leather, clicks his tongue sharply to keep the animal moving. The cart is piled high with baskets of olives, their green skins glistening in the early light. The sight makes your mouth water, but you know the cost. Olives are for those with more coins than you have. You step aside to let the cart pass, brushing against the wall to avoid the splash from the gutter. The water there is dark and sluggish, moving slowly along the center of the road, carrying away everything the city no longer wants. You pull your tunic a little closer, not for warmth, but as a kind of instinctive barrier against the grit in the air. Ahead, the forum begins to stir. Even this early, the open space is dotted with activity. Traders setting up their stalls, messengers weaving through the crowd with scrolls tucked under their arms, and the occasional stray dog scavenging for scraps. The marble columns catch the sunlight, throwing sharp shadows across the paving stones. For a moment, it's almost beautiful, until you notice the grime clinging to the base of the pillars and the tired expressions on the faces of those passing by. A crier steps into the center of the square, unrolling a scroll and calling out the day's notices. His voice cuts through the morning din. Announcements about grain prices, upcoming games at the Colosseum, and a new edict from the Senate regarding street repairs in a distant quarter of the city. The crowd barely listens. Most have their own matters to attend to. You find yourself drifting toward a stall selling bread. The loaves are still warm, their crusts crackling faintly as the baker moves them from the oven to the wooden counter. The smell is intoxicating. For a brief moment, you consider spending your last few coins, but the thought of going hungry later stops you. Bread can wait. Nearby, two men argue in rapid, sharp Latin. They stand close, faces inches apart, gesturing wildly. You can't quite catch all the words, but the tone tells you enough. It's about money, and neither side intends to back down. A small group gathers, drawn by the rising tension, but just as quickly disperses when a pair of vigils, the city's watchmen, walk past. And all the while the sun climbs higher, the streets grow busier, and the noise swells until it's a constant backdrop, a living wall of sound. You feel the first beads of sweat at the back of your neck. Your day is only beginning, but already Rome demands something from you. Your energy, your attention, your patience. In this city, nothing is truly still. Not the streets, not the air, not even you. Survival means moving with it, matching its pace, letting it carry you without letting it crush you. You take a breath, steady yourself, and keep walking. The day in Rome waits for no one. Part 2. The Marketplace Maze. The crowd thickens as you approach the market quarter. Here, the streets seem to bend and twist on themselves, the line between alleyway and thoroughfare blurring until you're no longer certain whether you're following the road or the flow of people. You catch glimpses of color between shoulders and backs, bolts of dyed cloth from the east, stacks of painted pottery, glints of bronze and silver in the morning light. Voices overlap in a chaotic chorus, traders calling out prices, buyers haggling with exaggerated groans, children darting through legs with hands full of stolen fruit. A boy runs past you clutching an apple, his tunic barely reaching his knees. Behind him, a stallholder shouts and gives chase for 2 steps before realizing the futility. The apple is gone, and the boy has vanished into the crowd. Here, theft is a language of survival, not admired, but understood. The air is thick with smells that tug at your senses in every direction. Freshly baked bread mingles with the pungent tang of fermented fish sauce. Garum, the seasoning that flavors nearly everything in Rome. You pass a table where the sauce is sold in tall, narrow amphorae, their clay necks sealed with resin. The merchant waves at you, offering a sample, but you shake your head and keep moving. Even free food comes with a cost here. A sudden splash makes you step sideways. A woman has upended a bucket of water onto the stones, sweeping away scraps of vegetable peel and fish bones. The liquid rushes down the gutter, joining the sluggish flow that snakes through the street. You lift the hem of your tunic just in time to avoid a dark stain spreading across the fabric. Nearby, a pair of merchants are locked in an argument over the price of grain. One gestures toward the sky, muttering about poor harvests in Sicily. The other rolls his eyes and accuses him of inventing shortages to drive prices higher. Their voices draw a small audience, but you can tell it's a familiar scene. Today's words are echoes of yesterday's, and tomorrow we'll hear the same again. You weave between stalls, eyes catching on details. The gleam of pomegranate seeds spilling from a cracked rind, the worn leather of a sandal maker's display, the delicate scent of lavender from a basket carried by a woman in a faded shawl. Rome's wealth shows itself not in palaces alone, but here, in the goods brought from across the empire, all condensed into a single, restless knot of commerce. But the market is more than trade. It's where rumors are bought and sold as eagerly as olives or bread. You overhear a man whispering about unrest in the northern provinces, another claiming that a famous gladiator has been seen walking the streets after his supposed death in the arena. Each word is passed like a coin, traded for attention and belief. A sudden shout slices through the noise. 2 vigils push through the crowd, their wooden staves in hand. People step aside quickly. The watchmen may not carry swords, but their authority is real enough. They stop at a stall selling bronze trinkets, speaking sharply to the owner. You catch the words false weight and overcharging. The merchant protests, swearing by the gods that his measures are honest. One of the vigils lifts a small bronze scale and tips the weights onto the ground with a deliberate clatter. You look away, instinctively avoiding the gaze of the watch. In Rome, attention from authority is rarely a blessing. You slip between 2 stalls, letting the crowd close behind you. At the edge of the marketplace, the noise begins to thin, the press of bodies loosening. The buildings open up, revealing a narrow street that slopes gently downward. You follow it, grateful for the space to breathe. Your stomach growls softly, reminding you that you've eaten nothing since dawn. You could return to the market, spend the few coins in your pouch, but every purchase has to be weighed against the rest of the day. The baker's loaves, the olives in their brine, the figs stacked like jewels, all of them call to you, but hunger is a patient companion. It will wait. The street bends again, and you find yourself facing the distant shimmer of the Tiber, its surface catching the sunlight in fractured, restless ripples. Somewhere beyond its banks lie the fields, the farms, and the roads that carry goods and trouble into the city. But for now, the river is just another part of Rome's pulse, carrying life and waste away in equal measure. You take another breath. The marketplace is behind you, but its echoes stay in your ears. The shouts, the clinking of coins, the whispered rumors that might mean nothing or everything. Rome is a city that never lets go once it has your attention, and you're still in its grip. Part 3. The heat and the hubs of the city. The sun climbs higher, and the city's mood changes with it. Shadows shorten, retreating toward the bases of walls and colonnades, leaving the streets exposed to a blaze of white light. The air thickens. It feels almost solid against your skin. Even the stone beneath your sandals radiates the heat it has been quietly absorbing all morning. You move slower now, not because you want to, but because the city itself seems to demand it. The frantic pace of the marketplace fades into a kind of uneasy pause. Merchants fan themselves lazily behind their stalls. Messengers pause in doorways to drink from small clay cups. Dogs lie sprawled in thin strips of shade, too hot to chase anything but their own dreams. A man ahead of you is selling cups of watered wine from a tall, narrow jug. The liquid is the pale red of diluted garnet, sloshing gently as he pours for a pair of sweating laborers. You catch the faint scent of vinegar in the drink. Not enough to spoil it, just enough to hint at how long it has been standing in the sun. The men drain their cups in one pull, drop their coins into the seller's hand, and vanish into a side street. The soundscape of Rome shifts as you walk. The sharp cries of traders give way to the heavier, echoing rhythm of footsteps in colonnaded walkways. Somewhere close by, the hollow ring of a hammer on bronze punctuates the air. From another street drifts the faint murmur of voices chanting, perhaps a small procession making its way to a shrine. You find yourself drawn toward one of the city's busiest gathering places, the public baths. Not everyone comes here to bathe. Some arrive for business meetings, others for gossip, others simply to be seen. You pass under a high stone arch and into a shaded courtyard, the heat outside replaced by a cool stillness that feels almost ceremonial. The baths are vast, built on a scale that speaks to Rome's obsession with order and display. Marble columns rise like frozen trees, supporting ceilings painted with faded scenes from old myths. The scent of damp stone and perfumed oil hangs in the air. Somewhere deeper inside, you hear the trickle of water spilling from a fountain into a shallow basin. Groups of men stand in loose circles, speaking in low voices. Their words are measured, careful, deals being made, debts being negotiated, news being exchanged. This is where information changes hands as quickly as coin. And in Rome, information can be more dangerous than any blade. You don't linger long. Spaces like this are for those who can afford to stay, who have the confidence to hold the gaze of the city's most influential faces. For the rest, it's safer to keep moving. You step back into the sunlight, blinking as your eyes adjust. The heat hits you again like a physical weight. You keep to the narrowest streets now, letting the buildings funnel whatever scraps of shade they can. Rome is full of these corridors, cramped, uneven, and winding, with walls so close that you can stretch your arms and touch both sides. Somewhere above, a voice calls down in a rush of angry Latin. A bucket of something unpleasant splashes into the gutter near your feet, followed by the sharp slam of a wooden shutter. You step around the spreading puddle, the smell making your eyes water. In Rome, the streets are not just for walking. They are where the city disposes of what it no longer wants to see. Eventually, you emerge into a small square where a fountain burbles steadily. The water here is clearer than the sluggish streams in the gutters, fed by one of the aqueducts that carry life into the city. You cup your hands and drink, feeling the cool liquid cut through the heavy heat. For a moment, it's easy to forget the noise, the dust, and the undercurrent of danger. But Rome has a way of reminding you where you are. A man in a patched cloak brushes past, his eyes scanning the crowd too carefully, his hand lingering just a moment too long near the pouch at your belt. You step away, tightening your grip, and he melts back into the movement of the square, as if he had never been there at all. You breathe, slow and steady. The city is alive around you, brilliant, brutal, beautiful, and utterly indifferent to whether you thrive or vanish within it. And as the afternoon approaches, you sense that the real tests of survival are only just beginning. You follow the pull of the crowd, and soon the streets widen. The air opens up, revealing a space unlike any you've seen yet, the Forum. It stretches before you like a stage, every stone heavy with the memory of speeches, oaths, and verdicts. This is the true heart of Rome, where the voices of the city rise to shape its destiny. Marble columns cast sharp shadows on the ground, their fluted edges catching the sun like the ribs of a giant skeleton. The scents here are different, not so much of fish and spices, but of incense from nearby temples and the faint tang of polished bronze. Here, senators walk in pairs or small groups, their white togas edged in deep purple stripes that mark their rank. They speak in low voices, glancing often over their shoulders. The Forum is open, yes, but it's never private. Every word carries risk. You pause near the steps of the Basilica Julia, where a small crowd gathers around a man standing on a raised platform. He's a lawyer, one of the orators Rome produces in endless supply. And today he's defending a merchant accused of cheating the state on grain deliveries. His voice carries, crisp and deliberate, every phrase designed to sway both the magistrates and the onlookers. The case seems minor, but the tension is sharp enough to cut. Grain is Rome's lifeblood. Control its flow, and you control the city. Behind the lawyer, the accused stands rigid, eyes darting between the crowd and the officials. You notice one man among the listeners, his arms folded, a faint smile tugging at his lips. He's not here for justice. He's here to see whether his rival will fall. You turn away before the verdict comes. In Rome, verdicts are often decided before the trial begins, and knowing too much about the wrong case can be dangerous. You wander toward the center of the Forum, where temples rise like islands of carved stone. The Temple of Saturn looms ahead, its 8 columns all that remain of its once massive facade. This is where the state's treasury is kept, or at least what's left of it after endless wars and bribes. 2 guards stand at the base of the steps, their armor gleaming, faces impassive. They could be statues, if not for the way their eyes track every passerby. As you pass, you hear the clatter of hooves on stone. A small procession moves through the square, a magistrate being escorted by lictors, each carrying the fasces, bundles of rods with an axe blade fixed at the top. It's not just a symbol of authority. It's a reminder that the magistrate has the power to punish, even to execute, if the law demands it. The crowd parts for them, and for a moment you feel the strange push and pull of Roman life, the awe of its order and the unease of knowing how quickly that order can turn on you. Near the steps of another temple, an old man sits cross-legged, a small cloth spread before him covered in wax tablets and styluses. He carves lines into the soft surface with practiced precision. As you pass, he looks up and says something quietly. News from the provinces if you have the coin. You hesitate, but curiosity wins. For a few copper pieces, he tells you, unrest in Hispania, pirates bold again in the eastern seas, a rumor, unconfirmed, of a legion mutiny in the north. It's hard to tell how much is truth and how much is shaped to sell. In Rome, news is a commodity, and like any commodity, it can be stretched, trimmed, or twisted to fit the buyer. Somewhere across the forum, the shouts of another orator rise, younger, louder, and angrier than the first. His words cut through the hum of the crowd, calling out corruption in the Senate, naming names. People stop to listen, some cheer, others slip quietly away. You can almost see the invisible lines being drawn, the alliances, the grudges, and you realize this square is not just a marketplace of goods, but a marketplace of power. And power in Rome can be as deadly as any weapon. The forum is not just politics and temples. Beyond the speeches and marble, there is the marketplace, the tabernae, where coins change hands faster than oaths. You drift toward a row of stalls tucked beneath the colonnades. Their tables overflow with everything Rome pulls from its far-flung provinces. Amphorae of olive oil from Hispania, honey from Sicily, silk from the east so fine it slips through your fingers like water. The air here smells of roasted nuts, warm bread, and the occasional whiff of something sharp. Garum, the fermented fish sauce beloved by Romans and despised by nearly everyone else. Merchants call out their prices, voices overlapping in a chorus of urgency. A woman in a faded tunic haggles with a spice trader, her tone fierce, her hands slicing the air in gestures sharp enough to cut. She's not just bargaining for a better price. She's bargaining for the difference between feeding her family well tonight or stretching yesterday's bread another day. As you pause to watch, a movement catches your eye. A boy, no more than 12, slips between the bodies with the fluid grace of someone who's done this many times before. His fingers dart to the purse hanging from the belt of a man in a dark cloak. The knot loosens. The purse vanishes. For a heartbeat, it seems no one has noticed until the man turns and his eyes find the boy instantly. They are cold, assessing eyes. His hand falls to the hilt of the short dagger at his side. The boy bolts. You're swept along as the crowd parts just enough for the chase to streak through. The boy ducks beneath a table, scattering baskets of figs across the stones. The man follows, moving with unnerving precision, his cloak flaring behind him. The boy doesn't make it far. 2 other men appear from the shadows, blocking his path. They're not market guards. They're dressed too well, their movements too controlled. A few murmurs ripple through the crowd. People watch, but no one steps in. In Rome, certain disputes are better left alone. One of the men grips the boy by the collar, forcing him to his knees. The man in the cloak takes his purse back. There's a pause, too long for comfort. Then, without a word, he nods once to his companions and turns away. The two men release the boy, but not without a warning. A low hiss of words you can't catch, but whose meaning is clear from the way the boy's face drains of color. He vanishes into the crowd, limping slightly, and the market resumes as if nothing happened. But the air feels different now, quieter. You're reminded that in Rome, law is only one kind of justice, and often not the one that comes first. You move on, passing stalls where scribes sit ready to write letters for those who cannot. A soldier in dusty armor leans on a table, dictating slowly, his words meant for someone far away. Perhaps a wife, perhaps a mother. His voice softens as he speaks, the stern lines of his face easing for just a moment. Nearby, a woman sells amulets said to ward off the evil eye. She catches you looking and presses a small bronze charm into your palm, a hand-shaped token, its fingers arranged in a gesture older than the city itself. "For luck," she says, her voice low. "You'll need it here." And for some reason, you believe her. By day, the Forum is Rome's public stage, crowded, noisy, alive. But when the sun drops and the last of the merchants pack away their wares, the marble courtyards change. Shadows pool beneath the colonnades. The air cools, carrying the smell of old fires and trampled dust. The city's heartbeat slows, but it does not sleep. You find yourself walking the same stones you crossed earlier, yet the space feels entirely different. Torches flicker at intervals, throwing long shapes across the paving. The great statues of senators and generals now loom like silent watchers, their features half swallowed by darkness. In the far corner, near the steps of the Basilica Julia, a cluster of men huddle in conversation. Their tunics are plain, but the way they glance about, sharp, quick, tells you they are not discussing grain prices. Their voices are low, each sentence punctuated by subtle hand gestures. You catch fragments. Shipment, crossing, before the watch. Whatever they're planning, it isn't meant for daylight ears. A sudden shout cracks through the stillness. Across the Forum, a man stumbles out from between two buildings, clutching his side. His toga is torn, and his face glistens with sweat. He doesn't run toward help. He runs toward the shadows, disappearing into an alley before you can process what you've seen. Two figures follow moments later. They move quickly, but not recklessly. Their steps are deliberate, their eyes scanning. One carries something that glints in the torchlight, a blade angled low. They pass within a few feet of you, and for a moment you feel the heat of their presence, the faint scent of leather and iron. Then they too vanish into the narrow dark. The Forum exhales, and the silence rushes back in. You turn toward the arch of Septimius Severus, its carvings catching the last light from a distant torch. A man in a patched cloak leans against the base of the monument, his hands tucked deep inside. He watches you without expression, not hostile, not welcoming, just watching. When you shift your gaze, he's gone, swallowed by the shadows as if he were never there. Somewhere to your right, the measured steps of the vigils, Rome's night watch, echo on stone. They carry staves and short swords, their bronze helmets catching the firelight as they pass. One of them gives you a glance, a quick assessment, and then moves on. You keep walking, careful to stay in the pools of light where the torches burn brightest. Here, survival is not about strength or speed. It's about being seen by the right people and unseen by the wrong ones. Section 3, Part 1, In the Shadow of the Subura. The Subura, Rome's most infamous district, is where the city sheds its marble mask. By day, it's a crowded warren of narrow streets, teeming with shopkeepers, barbers, bakers, and beggars. But when the sun dips, the Subura transforms into something far less forgiving. The air grows thick with the scent of smoke, spilled wine, and the human press of bodies. Your feet carry you along a winding lane where tall, leaning insulae, the apartment blocks of the poor, seem to close in from either side. Laundry lines sway above your head, their damp cloths brushing faintly in the breeze. Somewhere, a baby cries. Somewhere else, a man laughs. The kind of laugh that doesn't reach the eyes. It's here, in these twisting streets, that Rome's gangs thrive. They call themselves collegia, brotherhoods in name, but their unity is forged by intimidation more than loyalty. Some claim ancient roots, tied to trades or temples. Others are little more than hired muscle for whichever patron pays best. As you pass beneath a low archway, you notice 3 men leaning against a wall painted with faded red graffiti, an oath of allegiance to a certain gang that controls this stretch of the Subura. The men are not armed in plain sight, but the bulge beneath their cloaks speaks otherwise. Their eyes track your movement without a word. A narrow alley opens to your left, dimly lit by the flicker of an oil lamp hanging above a door. A woman stands there, her dress simple but her gaze sharp. She whispers something you can't catch, then gestures toward the shadows behind her. You keep moving. In the Subura, curiosity can be as dangerous as a blade. The deeper you go, the more the street tilts upward. A boy darts past you, his bare feet slapping the stones, clutching a loaf of bread under his arm. Moments later, an older man barrels after him, shouting in a mix of rage and desperation. You step aside, watching the chase disappear into the maze of side streets, and then you hear it, the slow, deliberate clap of hands. Turning, you see a figure seated on a low stool outside a tavern, the smell of sour wine spilling from its open door. He's broad-shouldered, his hair cropped short, his forearms knotted with muscle. Around his neck hangs a strip of dyed cloth, knotted in a way you've seen before, the mark of the gang that rules here. He smiles, but it's not a friendly one. "Not from around here, are you?" he says, his Latin rough, the syllables drawn out. It's not quite a threat, not quite a greeting. Somewhere behind you, a door slams shut. Somewhere ahead, the street curves out of sight. In the Subura, every step is a choice, and every choice has its price. You take a breath, keeping your steps unhurried. In a place like the Subura, moving too quickly is an admission that you are afraid, or worse, that you are worth chasing. The gang leader's eyes follow you as you pass, his smirk fading into a look of quiet calculation. You know that kind of gaze. It's the same one a merchant gives to a coin he hasn't yet weighed. The street narrows. Above, the walls seem to lean even closer together, blocking out much of the moonlight. You pass a bakery whose shutters are already bolted, the sweet scent of cooling bread still lingering in the air. Beside it, a stairway climbs into darkness, the entrance to an insula that houses dozens of families in cramped wooden rooms stacked above one another like crates. Somewhere up there, an argument is brewing. Voices rising, sharp and muffled by thin plaster walls. A sudden sound snaps your attention back to the street. The scrape of sandals against stone, quickening behind you. You glance over your shoulder. 2 men now trail you at a measured distance. You've seen their kind before. Not soldiers, not thugs in the full daylight sense, but the shadowy middlemen who thrive in Rome's underbelly. The alley up ahead forks. To the left, a faint light spills from the open door of a wine shop. To the right, nothing but darkness and the smell of damp brick. You choose the wine shop, stepping into the soft glow of its oil lamps. Inside, a handful of customers sit hunched at low tables, cups of watered wine in their hands. No one looks up when you enter. The shopkeeper, an older man with sunken cheeks, nods you toward a seat. You take it. The wood worn smooth from countless patrons before you. The wine that arrives is thin, bitter, but it's warm in your stomach, and for a moment you feel safer. That moment doesn't last. The two men from the street slip inside, their faces unreadable. They don't speak to you, but they sit at the table nearest the door. One keeps his eyes on the street outside. The other watches you with a patience that feels heavier than any direct threat. The shopkeeper notices, his jaw tightening ever so slightly. Without a word, he sets down another cup of wine in front of you. This one darker, richer, and far better than the first. It's an unspoken message. Stay, drink, let the trouble pass by. Outside you hear the distant clang of metal. Perhaps a dropped pot. Perhaps something sharper. In the Subura, sounds carry, and meaning shifts depending on who's listening. You take a slow sip, the warmth spreading again, and realize that survival here isn't always about fighting or running. Sometimes, it's about waiting. About letting the city's currents flow past you without being pulled under. The wine sits half-finished in front of you. You can still feel the two men's presence, like weights on either side of the room, but you pretend not to notice. In Rome, pretending can be a kind of shield. Outside, the narrow street suddenly erupts with noise. A woman's voice rises in anger, shrill and sharp, followed by the unmistakable crash of a clay amphora shattering on stone. The shopkeeper's head turns, just for a moment, toward the doorway. That's all it takes for the tension to shift. One of the men by the door leans forward, murmurs something to his companion, and they both step out. You hear their footsteps vanish into the night, swallowed by the chaos outside. You let out a slow breath you didn't realize you were holding. The shopkeeper shrugs, as if to say, "This is the Subura." People leave as suddenly as they appear. Curiosity gets the better of you. You step into the street, the night air cool against your face. A small crowd has gathered around the source of the noise. A man in a rough tunic, crouched on the ground, trying to gather the broken pieces of pottery. Beside him, a woman, perhaps his wife, stands with her hands on her hips, hurling accusations about money wasted and promises broken. From the shadows, two teenagers dart forward, snatching what looks like bread from the man's scattered goods before disappearing into a side alley. No one chases them. Here, theft is just part of the breathing rhythm of life. Then, as if on cue, the crowd disperses. Arguments are common enough that they rarely hold attention for long. The woman storms away, the man limps after her, and the street becomes itself again, narrow, dim, and indifferent. You realize the moment's lesson. In Rome, danger isn't always a grand spectacle. It's in the ordinary, in how quickly a peaceful street can shift, how swiftly strangers can decide whether you're worth their time or worth their blade. You glance once more toward the wine shop. The shopkeeper stands in the doorway watching you. He gives a small nod, perhaps in respect, or perhaps just acknowledgement that you've passed this night's trial. But tomorrow will be another night, and the Subura will still be waiting. Section 4. Part 1. Into the heart of the Forum. You wake to the muffled hum of the city coming alive. Rome is never truly silent, not even in the small hours before dawn. But mornings have a rhythm of their own. It starts with the clatter of shutters being unlatched, the low murmur of early traders setting out their goods, the bleating of goats driven toward the markets. You rise, stretch, and feel the stiffness in your legs from the uneven cobblestones of last night's walk. Your mind turns to the day ahead. If the Subura was a knot of twisting alleyways and sharp glances, today's path will take you into the open, into the Forum Romanum, the very heart of the empire. The route is longer than it looks on a map, and it winds downward from the crowded tenement streets toward the grand marble plazas. You join the stream of people already making their way there. Bakers with carts of steaming loaves, slaves bearing baskets of figs, merchants calling out in half-sung Latin to advertise fresh catches from Ostia. As you walk, the air changes. The smell of wood smoke and cheap wine from the Subura fades, replaced by the mingling scents of fresh bread, honey cakes, roasting meat, and, faintly, the acrid tang of animal dung from the oxen carts. Ahead, the first hints of monumental Rome begin to appear. Broken columns line the street, remnants of older temples half swallowed by newer constructions. The buildings grow taller and cleaner. The voices around you shift too. Less of the coarse slang from the Subura, more of the rounded, deliberate speech of citizens who wish to be overheard. You pass under an arch, not a triumphal one of great fame, but still carved with faded reliefs of soldiers, horses, and laurel wreaths. A beggar sits at its base, his toga ragged, his eyes dull from either illness or hunger. He holds out a clay cup and whispers a plea for denarii. A woman in fine stola skirts by without looking at him, her gold fibula pin catching the morning light. Moments later, a slave boy drops a crust of bread into the cup. The beggar nods once, mutters thanks, and begins chewing without looking up. The closer you draw to the Forum, the more the space opens. The street widens into a stone-paved plaza ringed by towering columns and porticos. It feels like stepping into another Rome entirely, one that breathes marble dust and ambition. The Forum isn't just a marketplace, it's the city's living memory. Every pillar, every inscription is a statement, some of victory, some of piety, some of pure vanity. Here, the decisions that shape lives are debated, the gossip that can ruin reputations is traded, and the deals that build fortunes are struck. The sound here is different too, layered and constant. Merchants shout prices, philosophers hold forth in loud rhythmic tones, petitioners call to magistrates in urgent voices. The air is thick with the mingling of business, politics, and spectacle. To your left, the Temple of Saturn rises, its tall columns crowned with a weathered inscription in Latin. It has stood here for centuries, and within its cella once lay Rome's treasury. A few older men stand in its shade, speaking in low tones about grain shipments from Egypt and rumors of price changes. Their tunics are clean but plain, men of means, but not of excess. To your right, a group has gathered around a speaker standing atop a worn stone step. He's young, but his voice carries well, and he gestures with the sharp precision of someone trained in rhetoric. He's railing against a local magistrate accused of skimming money from road repairs. The crowd reacts in ripples, a murmur of agreement here, a skeptical laugh there. In Rome, public opinion is both entertainment and weapon. You make your way toward the market stalls, set under the shade of the Basilica Julia. Here, the goods are finer than in the Subura. You see trays of delicate glassware from the east, bolts of dyed cloth from Tyre, amphorae of olive oil stamped with the seals of noble houses. The merchants here are quick-eyed and quick-tongued, able to gauge your purse at a glance. One calls to you in Greek, offering a small silver charm for protection against envy. Another unfurls a piece of silk so fine you can almost see through it, a luxury from far beyond the empire's borders. He tells you it came along the Silk Road, through Parthian lands, past caravans of camels and deserts that stretch for weeks. His price is as high as his story is long. As you linger, you notice a small incident nearby. A boy, no more than 12, has been caught with a hand in the wrong basket. The stall owner, a thick-set man with arms like pillars, has him by the wrist. The boy squirms, eyes darting around for help. The crowd watches but does not intervene. Some smile, some shake their heads. The merchant berates the boy. Then, perhaps deciding he's too small to bother the magistrates with, shoves him away with a warning. The boy disappears into the throng as if swallowed. It's a quiet reminder. Here the forum may gleam with marble, but the same hunger gnaws as in the back streets. You take a seat on a low wall near the edge of the plaza. From here you can see the whole sweep of the forum, from the Arch of Septimius Severus to the steps of the Curia, where senators will soon gather. Pigeons strut between the paving stones, pecking at crumbs. A pair of soldiers walk past in step, their armor catching the sunlight. The rhythm of the place is hypnotic. You begin to see the invisible lines of power. Who speaks to whom? Who waits for whom? Who pretends not to see someone approaching? Deals are struck with handshakes, sealed with nods, or undone with a raised eyebrow. You understand, in that moment, that survival here is not only about avoiding danger, it's about reading the currents, knowing when to step forward and when to fade into the marble background. Somewhere nearby, a water clock marks the hour. Shadows lengthen slightly as the sun climbs higher. Traders rearrange their stalls, philosophers draw in new listeners, and the first senatorial robes appear at the Curia steps. For now, you rise and step back into the flow of the forum. The city's heart beats all around you, steady and relentless. You are part of it now. Another voice, another pair of eyes, another step on the worn stones that have carried countless lives before yours. Tomorrow, the forum will look much the same. But today, it belongs to you. The roar fades, but it doesn't vanish. Even after the last gladiator has left the sand and the crowds have begun to spill back into the streets, the echo of what you witnessed lingers in the air. A strange blend of excitement, horror, and something far more ancient than the games themselves. The sun has dipped lower, spilling amber light across the Colosseum's massive arcades. Its shadows stretch far, swallowing whole streets in cool darkness. You decide to follow the flow of the departing spectators, but it quickly becomes clear that not all paths away from the arena are equal. The wealthy drift toward lit streets, toward taverns where the wine is expensive and the company carefully chosen. The poor slip into the narrow lanes, where lamps are scarce, and the smell of stale water and cooking fires hangs thick. You find yourself pulled toward the latter, curiosity outweighing caution. Somewhere ahead, laughter erupts, harsh, mocking laughter. You round a corner and find a group of young men clustered around an older one. His tunic is patched, his sandals worn nearly through, and in his hands he clutches a small leather pouch. The youths jeer and shove him, demanding to see what's inside. You don't need to be told that the man probably earned a few coins working as part of the Munera crew, those who clear the arena after the games, hauling away sand darkened with blood, sweeping away the detritus of the spectacle. It's exhausting work, paid just enough to buy bread for a day or two. One of the youths snatches the pouch. The man reaches for it, but a quick punch to the stomach folds him in half. Coins spill onto the ground, catching the last light of day before rolling into the shadows. The group scatters, laughing again, leaving the man gasping and empty-handed. He gathers himself slowly, not out of shame, but because there is no rush. No one will come to help. He knows it, and so does everyone watching from doorways and windows. You realize that in this city, survival doesn't always depend on strength. Sometimes it depends on how quickly you accept what's lost. Further on, the street widens into a marketplace still alive with activity. The stalls here cater to the after-games crowd, selling skewers of spiced meat, bread fresh from clay ovens, cups of watered wine. You catch snippets of conversation, wagers won and lost, opinions on the day's fighters, gossip about the emperor's mood. One woman, her hair tied back with a strip of red cloth, is selling small clay figurines of gladiators. She molds them herself, shaping each with surprising detail. The curve of a helmet, the curve of a sword. Her hands move quickly, and you notice she never meets the eyes of her customers. Instead, her gaze flits constantly to the edge of the crowd, as if searching for someone. Finally, a boy of about 10 appears, darting through the press of people. He slips behind the stall, grabs a small loaf of bread from a hidden basket, and disappears again into the darkness. The woman exhales, not in relief, but in resignation. That bread was likely meant for her, but in Rome, the hierarchy of hunger decides everything. The smell of roasting meat draws you toward a brazier where a man turns skewers over glowing coals. His arms are scarred, not from the arena, but from years of working the flames. He offers you a piece, the meat sizzling in the cooling evening air. As you eat, he tells you, without prompting, that he once fought as a secutor in the Colosseum. "It's not like they say," he murmurs, voice low so as not to carry. "They think we live for glory, for the crowd's cheers. But what we lived for was another sunrise, just one more day." He doesn't elaborate, but his eyes, shadowed and distant, tell the rest of the story. The games took years from him, but they also gave him this stall, this small measure of safety. He stokes the coals, and you realize his survival is not freedom. It's a quieter captivity. You leave the marketplace as night settles fully over the city. The torches in the main streets burn bright, but here in the lanes that run behind the Colosseum, light is a rare luxury. The stone walls are slick with moisture, the air cooler, quieter, almost too quiet. Then, a sound. Soft footsteps, matching your own pace. You quicken your stride. The footsteps quicken too. Turning sharply, you find yourself face to face with a figure cloaked in shadow. No words are spoken, but the message is clear in the way they block your path, in the slight tilt of their head. Rome's thieves don't always work in crowds. Sometimes they work in the silence between heartbeats. But tonight, fortune tilts in your favor. Somewhere behind you, a voice calls out, loud and sharp, and the figure hesitates, just long enough for you to slip away, melting into the next street. When you finally stop, breathless, you realize the city has taught you another lesson. The Colosseum may be the heart of Rome's spectacle, but it's the streets beyond its walls that test your survival. Here, the games never truly end. They simply change their form. The Colosseum has emptied for the night. The roar of the crowd, the blare of horns, the stamping of feet, all of it has faded into the hum of Rome's evening. In its place comes the quieter work of the city, cleaning the arena, tending to the wounded, counting the day's coin. But your path tonight does not lead you out through the grand gates. Instead, you follow a narrow service corridor, the air heavy with the smell of sweat, leather, and iron. The corridor leads downward, deeper into the belly of the arena, into the ludus, the gladiator school. By daylight, the ludus is loud and relentless. Wooden swords clatter in the yard, chains rattle, trainers shout. But now, under the soft flicker of oil lamps, the place feels different. Tired men lie on straw pallets, some speaking quietly in languages you don't understand. The sound is subdued, a mutter here, a cough there, the occasional creak of rope or leather. Gladiators, contrary to popular tales, are not simply brutes thrown to the lions for spectacle. They are investments. Property of their lanista, the trainer and owner. They are fed, housed, and drilled with military precision. Their lives are valuable because they draw crowds, and crowds bring coin. Yet their value ends the moment they fail to entertain. A man in his 30s sits sharpening his blade. His face bears a web of scars, his nose broken more than once. You recognize him from earlier today, a victorious secutor whose final blow sent the crowd into a frenzy. You expect arrogance, but he barely looks up. He doesn't need to boast. His skill speaks for him. In the corner, a newcomer, barely more than a boy, practices footwork with a wooden sword. His stance is clumsy, his movements too stiff. A veteran walks over, adjusts his shoulders, mutters a few words, then walks away without waiting for thanks. The boy's jaw tightens. The next set of steps is better. You hear it before you see it. The faint groan of a man in pain. Down another dim corridor, you find the training yard's physician. He is cleaning a gash on a young man's thigh, his hands quick but careful. This gladiator, you realize, was not so lucky in today's matches. A cut like that will keep him from fighting for weeks. That's dangerous here. Weeks without winning means weeks without proving you still have worth. The physician works without fuss, but you can see the calculation in his eyes. He knows what happens to fighters who stop drawing the crowd's cheers. Some are sold. Others quietly disappear. A sharp whistle echoes through the hall. It's the lanista, a tall man with a shaved head, his arms folded across his chest, scanning the room like a commander inspecting his troops. His gaze is cold, but not without pride. These men, and they are mostly men, are his army. An army that fights not for empire or politics, but for the people's hunger for blood and victory. You step aside as he approaches the secutor. The two exchange a few words too low for you to catch, but the secutor nods. The lanista claps him on the shoulder and moves on. You wonder if this is praise or simply the recognition of a fighter who has earned his keep for another day. One of the younger gladiators catches your curious look. "You think this is a life?" he says, half smiling. His Latin is rough, but the meaning is clear. It is, until it isn't. He tilts his head toward the physician's corner, where the injured fighter lies, staring at the ceiling. There is a strange brotherhood here. They train together, fight together, bleed together. They live knowing tomorrow one of them may not return. Yet there is no bitterness, only the unspoken rule that you give your best while you still can. Then, a sudden commotion near the far end of the hall. Two men grapple, shouting in a tongue you can't place. The older of the pair slams the younger against the wall. Trainers rush in, separating them with the ease of men who have done this before. The lanista says nothing, only points to the door. The younger man is led out, his head bowed. Whether this is a punishment or a warning, you don't know. The lamps flicker as the hour grows late. The men settle in. Some mutter prayers to Mars or Hercules. Others simply roll over and close their eyes. The air grows heavy with the sound of breathing. Standing there, you feel the weight of this place. It's more than a school. It's a waiting room between life and death. The arena tomorrow may take some of them, but tonight they rest. Tonight they live. You turn to leave, your footsteps echoing softly on the worn stone. Above you, the Colosseum stands silent, its great arches bathed in moonlight. But even in the quiet, you know the next fight is already being imagined. By the crowd, by the fighters, by the city itself. Rome always wants more. The morning comes slowly in the ludus. Pale sunlight seeps through the high, narrow windows, cutting sharp stripes across the stone floor. The smell of damp straw and boiled barley fills the air as the fighters begin to stir. You're drawn to a quiet corner where a man is already awake, sitting cross-legged on his pallet. He's polishing a helmet, its bronze surface reflecting the light in soft glints. Unlike the others, he works with deliberate calm, as if every movement has been practiced countless times. His name, you learn, is Lucius Varro. But among the other gladiators, he is simply called Varro the Survivor. The name is not given lightly. He has lasted nearly 7 years in the arena, far beyond the life expectancy of most fighters. When you ask how he came here, he hesitates, eyes lingering on the helmet in his hands. Then, in a voice low enough that only you can hear, he begins. Varro was once a legionary in the service of Rome, stationed on the far edges of the empire. He speaks of cold winters in Germania, of endless marching, of comrades lost to ambush and fever. He was a soldier for 12 years, earning his onesta missio, an honorable discharge, and the modest pension that came with it. But life after the Legion was not the life he imagined. The land grant promised to him was already claimed by a wealthy senator's cousin. His appeals in the courts went nowhere. With no family left and no coin to buy influence, he drifted to Rome, hoping the capital might offer work. Instead, he found debt. A bad wager in the taverns, a loan taken to repay it, and within months, he was at the mercy of creditors. The lanista offered him a choice: work off his debt as a laborer for the gladiator school or fight in the arena. The pay for labor was slow and meager. The pay for fighting, if he survived, was enough to settle his debts in a year. I thought, he says, that a man who had faced barbarian spears could face the games. Varro's first months were brutal. The techniques of the ludus were different from the disciplined formations of the legion. Here, it was not about holding the line or fighting as a unit. It was about spectacle, about surviving long enough to give the crowd the show they paid for. His first match nearly killed him. Paired against a towering retiarius armed with a net and trident, he took a deep cut to the ribs before landing the final blow. As he lay bleeding on the sand, the crowd's chant rose like a storm. Not his name, but a single word: Vive. Live. The editor of the games raised his thumb. Varro lived to fight again, and again, and again. Now, 7 years later, Varro has fought more than 30 matches. His style is measured, defensive, calculated. He wins not with fury, but with patience, letting his opponents exhaust themselves before striking. The crowd respects him, even if they sometimes call for bloodier fighters. But there is something else that keeps him alive. He has a plan. Every coin he earns beyond his keep is saved, hidden sometimes in the cracks of the ludus walls, sometimes with trusted merchants outside. When he speaks of it, his voice lowers further. When I have enough, he says, I will buy my freedom. A gladiator can be freed, manumitted, if he earns enough to purchase it from the lanista. For most, it's a dream they never reach. Injuries, losses, and the whims of the crowd take them before they can save enough. But Varro believes he's close. 1 or 2 more big victories, and he could walk away. A shout from the training yard breaks the quiet. The morning drills are beginning. Varro sets down the helmet and straps on his training gear. You follow him outside, where wooden posts stand in rows, each scarred from years of sword strikes. The doctores, the trainers, bark commands, their voices echoing off the stone. Fighters move through drills, shield blocks, sword thrusts, evasive steps. Each motion is repeated until muscle and mind work without thought. Varro's opponent today is a younger man, faster but less disciplined. They trade blows, the sound of wood on wood cracking in the cool air. Varro blocks, sidesteps, waits. Then, in a single smooth movement, he sweeps the younger man's legs from under him. The trainers shout their approval. This is how he survives. By outthinking, not outrunning. Later, as the men rest, the talk turns to tomorrow's matches. Varro has been paired against a Murmillo from another ludus, a man known for ending fights in the first minute. Some of the younger fighters glance at Varro with unease. He only smiles faintly. First minute, he says, is when a man forgets to watch his own shield. That night, you find him again in his corner. He's alone, sharpening his sword in the lamplight. You ask if he's afraid. He shakes his head. Fear is for the man who thinks he can run. I know there's nowhere to run. His hands keep working, slow and steady. Above you, Rome is settling into darkness, unaware of the small, determined plans being forged in this quiet corner of the ludus. Tomorrow, the crowd will cheer or jeer, the editor will decide life or death, and the sand will drink its fill. But for Varro, tomorrow is not just another fight. It's one more step toward a life beyond the walls of the arena. One more chance to buy not just freedom, but the right to choose where his footsteps will lead. The senator's grand speeches may echo in the curia, and the emperor's decrees may ripple through the city like distant thunder. But here in the forum, the real power is often quieter and far more personal. It begins with a whisper in the corner of a colonnade. A freedman leans close to a grain merchant, murmuring about a senator's new policy, the kind that won't be written on any tablet or announced by any herald. The merchant listens, nods, and by the next morning, he's raised prices in one part of the city and lowered them in another. Those who understand the game know it's not about the grain at all. It's about the senator's rivals who rely on certain districts for their popularity. You stand near the rostra, watching a man in a deep blue toga, not purple, but close enough to hint at wealth without inviting imperial suspicion. He's smiling at an elderly woman selling olives. To the casual observer, it's a simple act of kindness. But you notice the way his eyes flick to a scribe standing nearby, who carefully notes the exchange. In a week, those olives will become a story told in the taverns, how the noble Marcus Flavius cares for the common folk. The woman may never know she's part of a political campaign. Nearby, a man you've seen before, the one with the hawk-like eyes from earlier, sidesteps between groups. He never stays long, just enough to catch fragments of conversation. Later, he'll pass these fragments to someone who will pass them to someone else, until they find their way into the ears of someone willing to pay for them. Rome thrives on this invisible current. The laws on marble tablets are just the surface. Beneath them, Influence flows like water through hidden channels. One merchant's delay in delivering goods to a particular district might tip a vote. A sudden gift of bread at the right moment could win loyalty from hundreds. An example drifts through your memory, told earlier by a fellow traveler. The story of Aulus Caecina Severus, a man who once seemed untouchable. He was clever, respected, and had the favor of the people, until a quiet rumor began to circulate. No one could say where it started. It wasn't shouted in the forum or carved into walls. It was murmured in markets, shared over cups of watered wine. The rumor claimed Caecina had insulted the emperor in private. Within weeks, his allies began to avoid him. His name disappeared from invitations. By the time he realized the danger, he had no protection left. The rumor, perhaps planted by a rival, had done its work. He was sent into exile without a trial. That's the Roman way. You don't need to strike the lion if you can poison the ground it walks on. As the afternoon heat begins to fade, you notice a group gathering at the steps of the Basilica Julia. Most wear plain tunics, but their voices are sharp and purposeful. They speak of an unfair tax levied in a southern province, and though their cause seems far away, you recognize the local faces in the group: shopkeepers, craftsmen, even a former soldier. One of them catches your eye. He gestures you closer, as if you belong here. His name is Gaius, and he speaks quickly, his words tumbling over one another. They plan to bring their complaint before a magistrate tomorrow, but they need more people to witness, to stand in the forum and nod at the right moments. The gesture will make the cause look larger, stronger. You ask what's in it for you. Gaius grins. Not much today, he says, but perhaps someday, when you need a crowd. You decline politely, but the thought lingers. In Rome, favors are a currency more valuable than coin. A sudden commotion draws your attention toward the temple of Saturn. A man in fine robes, perhaps a provincial governor, is surrounded by petitioners. They thrust tablets into his hands, each covered in neat writing. He smiles and nods, but his guards keep the crowd from pressing too close. This scene repeats itself every day in the forum. Ordinary people begging for extraordinary help. Some petitions will be ignored, others acted upon. But which is which depends not on justice, but on who stands to gain from granting them. You drift away toward the shadow of a colonnade where a group of scribes sits cross-legged on the ground, their wax tablets resting on their knees. They're busy transcribing the day's cases from the basilica, disputes over debts, accusations of fraud, even a quarrel about a stolen mule. It all seems mundane, yet each ruling has the potential to shift someone's fortunes forever. The longer you stand here, the more you understand that survival in Rome isn't about strength or even wealth. It's about knowing who moves the levers in the background, who pulls the invisible strings. The Suburra may teach you to watch the shadows for thieves and cutthroats, but the Forum teaches you to watch the shadows for ambition. As the sun dips lower, gilding the marble with a warm glow, you feel the strange pull of the city again. Rome is beautiful, yes, but it's also a maze, one where walls are built from debts, rumors, and whispered promises. And tonight, as you leave the Forum, the sound of soft laughter follows you. The laughter of men who know that the next shift in power may already be underway, and you might already be caught in it. The Forum is behind you now. The marble colonnades and murmured schemes fade into memory as you make your way down narrower streets, past workshops smelling of hot metal and animal hides. The air changes here. It's heavier, tinged with something that lingers in the back of your throat. The smell of sweat, oil, and old blood. Ahead rises a tall, weathered wall, topped with jagged tiles to deter climbing. From beyond it comes the rhythmic thud, thud, thud of wood striking wood, accompanied by the guttural shouts of men. You've reached the ludus, a gladiator school. The gate is thick and iron-bound, guarded by two men with arms like carved oak. They glance at you, then back to their dice game. You're not worth their attention, not unless you try to step inside uninvited. From a side entrance, a small group emerges. They move in a tight knot, their ankles shackled, their bare chests glistening with sweat. These are not the heroes of the arena you've seen painted on tavern walls. Their bodies bear the story of their survival and their failures. Jagged scars crisscross backs and arms. One man's ear is gone entirely, a smooth patch of scar tissue where it once was. They're escorted by a single figure in a red-dyed tunic, the lanista, master of the school. His expression is unreadable, but his eyes are sharp, calculating. To him, these men are neither criminals nor warriors, but investments. Each body is a wager in the dangerous economy of bloodsport. Inside, the sounds grow sharper. The clang of iron chains, the slap of bare feet against packed earth, the metallic rattle of weapons on a rack. You step into a large courtyard, where sunlight pours down unfiltered, turning the dust into a golden haze. Two men are locked in combat at the center. They wield wooden swords, rudis, but their strikes are anything but gentle. Each blow lands with a crack that makes your own palms sting. The onlookers, other trainees, call out encouragement or taunts, some grinning, others watching with the detached gaze of men calculating how they might defeat either opponent. The trainer, a thick-necked man with a whip coiled at his side, barks corrections. "Lower your shield, Gaius! Again! Again!" His voice is gravel wrapped in authority. The fighters obey without hesitation, not out of respect, but because hesitation here has consequences. You notice that the walls of the courtyard are lined with low benches, where a few men sit in chains. They aren't resting. They're being punished. The heat of the sun will bake them where they sit until the trainer decides they've learned their lesson. Beyond the training yard lies another space, roofed and cooler. Here the wounded are tended to, though tended is generous. A man lies on a pallet, his leg wrapped in linen that's already darkened with blood. A medicus kneels beside him, sewing a wound with the same calm precision a tailor uses on a tunic. The patient bites down on a strip of leather, his muffled groans barely carrying over the noise of the yard. Your attention shifts to a rack of weapons. They're not ceremonial or polished for display. These are tools meant for killing. Gladi with edges honed to a gleam, heavy tridents balanced for thrusting, nets weighted at the corners. Each is carefully maintained. A gladiator who trusts a dull blade will not last long enough to complain about it. A story drifts into your mind, told by the trainer earlier to a young recruit. The tale of Verus and Priscus, two famed gladiators whose final match became legend. After years of fighting, they faced each other in the arena before the emperor himself. Blow for blow, they matched each other's skill until exhaustion turned their limbs to lead. In the end, neither man fell, and the emperor, moved by their endurance, granted both their freedom. It's a tale told to inspire, though in this courtyard, most know that for every Verus or Priscus, there are 100 men who die nameless. As the afternoon light shifts, the lanista signals for a new round of sparring. A pair of newcomers is brought forward. They're thin, pale, their movements awkward. One has the unmistakable bearing of someone who's never known hard labor, perhaps a debtor or a disgraced noble. The other looks like he's been fighting for his life long before the ludus, lean, scarred, eyes quick and darting. The trainer tosses them wooden swords. Begin! The first blow is clumsy, more flail than strike. The trainer's whip cracks, not on flesh, but close enough to sting the air. Control! Precision! Again! You watch as the awkward noble stumbles under a well-aimed shove, falling hard into the dust. The others laugh, but it's not mockery alone. It's the grim recognition that weakness in the arena is death, and death is bad for everyone's odds in the betting ring. By the time the sun dips low, the men are exhausted. The lanista walks among them, speaking in low tones. Promises for those who improve, threats for those who don't. Here, survival is not just about strength. It's about learning the rhythm of the fight, the patience to wait for an opening, and the will to take it without hesitation. As you step back toward the gate, you glance one last time at the training yard. A cloud of dust hangs in the air, lit by the dying sun, and in it move the silhouettes of men who will soon step into an arena where every heartbeat could be their last. The morning sun has only just begun to creep over the top of the Colosseum's massive outer walls, but already the air inside hums with anticipation. The amphitheater is alive, not merely with the voices of tens of thousands of Romans, but with the smell of warm bread, spiced wine, and something darker, the sharp tang of fear. The gladiators have been kept in their cells below the arena all night, hearing the shuffle of feet above, the clank of metal gates being prepared, and the muffled roar of the city assembling to watch them fight. For the men waiting down there, the sounds are as familiar as a funeral drumbeat. You take your seat high in the stands, looking down on the sandy oval below. The emperor's platform gleams with purple drapery and gold accents, a statement that this spectacle is as much about his power as it is about blood. Nearby, senators recline on cushions, fanned by slaves, as they discuss business between sips of wine. The crowd erupts as the first parade begins. Musicians march out playing the hydraulis, an ancient water-powered organ, accompanied by the deep, chest-vibrating beat of kettle drums. Behind them come dancers, acrobats, and men dressed as mythical heroes, all there to warm up the audience before the real violence begins. Finally, the gladiators appear. They march in pairs, each man in full gear. Murmillos with their broad crested helmets and heavy rectangular shields, secutores with smooth helmets designed to deflect a net, lightly armored retiarii gripping long tridents. They pass before the emperor, raising their weapons in salute. And then, in a ritual so famous it will echo down history's corridors, the fighters call out in unison, Ave Caesar, morituri te salutant. Hail Caesar, those who are about to die salute you. The first contest is not man against man, but man against beast. From one of the arena's trapdoors, a half-starved lion bursts forth, its mane wild, its ribs visible beneath golden fur. The crowd gasps, then cheers. A condemned criminal, hands bound but given a spear, is shoved into the sand. His terror is immediate, his body frozen for a moment too long. The lion moves. The spear glances off its shoulder, and the rest is over in seconds. The crowd roars again, their bloodlust awakened. In the stands, you notice a young boy no older than 12 sitting beside his father. The boy's eyes are wide, not with horror, but with fascination. The father leans down, pointing to the sand, explaining the tactics of the fighters, a generational passing down of Rome's entertainment values. As the day continues, match after match plays out. Some are fair duels, evenly matched in armor and skill. Others are stacked from the start, a veteran pitted against a novice, a heavily armed man against one nearly naked. The sand grows darker as the hours pass, stained by what the crowd came to see. You think back to stories whispered in the taverns of Rome, of how some gladiators became so famous they were treated like celebrities, offered fine meals, expensive gifts, and the favors of wealthy patrons. But for every one of those, dozens died nameless, their bodies dragged away to be buried in mass graves outside the city walls. Near midday, the sun blazing down now, the loudest cheer yet erupts. The most anticipated fight is about to begin. A Murmillo veteran, undefeated in 10 bouts, faces a retiarius known for lightning-fast strikes with his trident. The contrast is almost theatrical. The Murmillo is built like a fortress, every inch covered in metal. The retiarius is bare-armed and light on his feet, his face uncovered, his only armor a shoulder guard. The fight begins slowly, each man testing the other's range. The Murmillo advances with short, shielded steps, the retiarius darting away, stabbing and retreating. The net swings once, twice, but fails to catch. Then, in a flash, the trident catches the Murmillo's leg. The crowd gasps. But the heavy fighter surges forward, battering his opponent's chest with the shield, knocking him to the ground. The Murmillo's sword hovers over the fallen man's throat. Now the arena becomes a theater of decision. The Murmillo looks to the emperor, who in turn looks to the crowd. Hands go up across the stands. Some turned palm up for mercy, others palm down for death. The noise is deafening, each side trying to sway the outcome. Finally, the emperor's hand tilts downward. The Murmillo delivers the blow. The retiarius's body is dragged away, the sand raked smooth to erase the scene. But you know the stain remains. This is Rome's idea of entertainment, a mirror of its own nature. Structured, ritualized, and yet utterly ruthless. For those who fight in the arena, survival depends on skill, on luck, and on the whims of a crowd that cheers for mercy one moment and death the next. And for you, sitting high in the stands, the lesson is clear. Rome is a place where life can be taken by spectacle, and where the cheers of thousands can be as lethal as the sharpest blade. Long before the marble grandeur of the Colosseum or the polished steps of the Forum, Rome's survival relied on something far less glamorous: its sewers. The Cloaca Maxima, the Great Drain, was a marvel of ancient engineering, a tunnel system that channeled the city's waste into the Tiber River. From the streets above, the citizens of Rome rarely gave it a second thought. But deep below the stone-paved roads, in the shadowed tunnels, a small army of men labored every day in conditions so foul that even the lowest slave might envy a life above ground. These were the sewer workers, the unseen hands that kept the eternal city from choking on its own filth. The work began before dawn. The streets were quiet, the temples still empty, and the smell of morning bread baking in ovens drifted faintly through the air. The men gathered at one of the main access points, heavy stone slabs covering the mouths of the sewers. With crowbars and wooden poles, they pried them open, releasing a wave of stench so strong it could make even the most hardened laborer gag. Down they went, one by one, carrying oil lamps to cut through the darkness. The air grew damp and heavy, and the sound of dripping water echoed endlessly. Narrow tunnels sloped away in all directions, some barely high enough to crawl through. The floor was slick with a mixture of water, mud, and far worse things. Here, in the belly of the city, time seemed to lose meaning. The men waded through waist-deep channels, scraping debris from the walls and clearing blockages with long iron hooks. Some clogs were just bundles of sticks or refuse. Others were more gruesome, the carcasses of stray dogs, broken furniture, or the bloated remains of someone the city wanted forgotten. Despite the horror, there was an unspoken rhythm to the work. The oldest sewer hands moved steadily, never rushing, conserving their strength. The younger ones attacked the blockages with more energy, eager to prove themselves, but it was a dangerous kind of eagerness. The tunnels were unpredictable. A sudden rainstorm miles away could send a wall of water rushing through, sweeping men away like twigs. Then there was the air. In some places, it was thick with noxious gases, the kind that could make a man dizzy and collapse before he had time to cry out. The veterans carried canaries in small cages, watching the birds closely. If the birds stopped singing, it was time to leave. The pay was meager, but it was still pay, more than some unskilled slaves would ever see. A few workers were free citizens who had fallen on hard times. Others were condemned criminals, working off their punishment in the dark. And some were slaves who had been unlucky enough to be sold to the public works. Above ground, life went on as usual. Patricians reclined in their gardens, merchants haggled in the markets, and priests made offerings to the gods. None of them thought much about the men below. But the truth was, without the sewer workers, Rome's grand avenues would soon run with filth, disease would spread, and the city's great engine of power would grind to a halt. There were moments of strange beauty down there, if you knew where to look. Shafts of light would sometimes pierce through gaps in the street above, illuminating the mossy walls in a ghostly glow. You could hear the muffled sounds of horses' hooves and wagon wheels, as if the city itself was breathing above you. But those moments were fleeting. More often, the tunnels felt like a grave. The walls closed in, the darkness pressed down, and the smell clung to your skin for days, no matter how much you washed. Sewer workers often found themselves shunned in taverns and markets. People claimed they could smell the cloaca maxima on them even in clean clothes. One story tells of a worker named Gaius, who vanished one day after entering a newly dug section of the tunnels. His companions searched for him for hours, their lamps flickering in the damp air. They finally found his body pinned beneath a collapsed section of stone, the water lapping at his lifeless face. The city's response was quick. They hauled him out, patched the wall, and the work resumed the next morning. In Rome, a man's life was small compared to the machinery of the city. Yet, among themselves, the sewer workers formed a kind of brotherhood. They shared their food, looked out for each other in the dangerous stretches, and swapped gallows humor to keep their spirits up. They gave names to certain tunnels. The Throat, for a narrow passage where the walls almost met, or the Snake, for a twisting stretch that seemed to go on forever. Sometimes they even found treasure. Coins, jewelry, or stolen goods flushed away in the chaos of daily life would wash into the drains. It wasn't common, but when it happened, the men kept it quiet, splitting the find among themselves. It was one of the few perks of a life otherwise defined by grime and danger. As you climb back into the sunlight at the end of the day, your eyes squint against the brightness. The sound of the city floods in. Merchants calling out prices, children laughing, the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer. Above ground, Rome smells of bread, olive oil, and roasting meat. But you carry the other smell with you, the stench of the underworld that no one wants to talk about. You know that tomorrow and the day after, you'll be back in the tunnels, wading through the veins of the city, unseen and unthanked. And you also know that without you, the mighty Rome would rot from within. When the sun slipped behind the hills and the golden glow faded from Rome's marble temples, the city did not sleep. It stirred in a different way. The daytime clamor of markets and Senate debates gave way to the creak of tavern doors, the shuffle of gamblers in back rooms, and the distant strum of a lyre drifting from a courtyard gathering. But for the vigils, the Roman night watch, the darkness was their shift beginning. These men were part firefighter, part police officer, and part street sweeper. The underappreciated guardians who patrolled the streets while most of Rome rested. The vigils were not glamorous soldiers in shining armor. They wore simple tunics, sometimes leather caps, and carried staves, buckets, hooks, and at times short swords. Many were freedmen, former slaves who had earned their liberty but found few respectable professions open to them. Service in the vigils meant steady pay, food rations, and a place to sleep in the city's watch stations. But it also meant danger, exhaustion, and little glory. The work began at dusk. Teams split into cohorts, each responsible for a section of the city. Rome was divided into districts, and each district had its own character. Some streets were narrow, twisting alleys where shadows hid cut purses and drunken brawlers. Others were grand avenues lined with noble villas, where trouble was quieter but no less real. Fires were the vigil's greatest enemy. Rome was a city of wood and thatch crowded together, where cooking fires burned in nearly every household and oil lamps lit every room. One overturned flame could consume an entire block before the sun rose. The vigils kept their buckets ready, filling them at the nearest fountain, and carried long hooks for tearing down burning roofs before the fire could spread. Patrolling was more than just watching for flames. The vigils broke up fights outside taverns, chased thieves through the winding streets, and escorted drunks home before they collapsed in the gutter. They were the first to respond to cries in the night, whether it was a burglary, a domestic dispute, or a street ambush. Sometimes they arrived too late, finding only silence and an empty alley. One of their lesser-known duties was dealing with runaway slaves. A master who lost valuable property, human property, would alert the vigils, who would comb the night streets in search of the fugitive. It was a grim task, made grimmer by the knowledge that capture meant brutal punishment. The vigils worked in pairs or small groups, moving quietly but with purpose. The streets after dark were unpredictable. Even in well-lit areas, shadows could conceal danger. Rome had no shortage of desperate men, thieves, smugglers, hired killers, who preferred to work when the city slept. The night air carried every scent, the sweetness of baking bread for the morning markets, the sharp tang of wine spilled on cobblestones, the rank odor of the open sewers that wound through the poorer districts. Lantern light flickered on the walls, throwing strange shapes that could be friend or foe until you stepped closer. The vigil's authority was real but limited. A wealthy citizen could make trouble for them if they interfered too much with his business. A powerful patron's word could halt an arrest. More than one vigil learned to look the other way when trouble came from the wrong kind of household. Still, there were moments of pride in the work. Saving a family from a burning insula, one of the towering apartment blocks, could earn gratitude that lasted years. Stopping a thief in the act could restore a merchant's faith in the law. And there were nights when the streets were calm, the patrol quiet, the moonlight spilling silver across the paving stones, and the vigils could almost enjoy the peace they guarded. Their watch ended at dawn. The first light crept over the rooftops, and the city's noise returned. Market stalls opened, carts rumbled over the stone roads, and the smell of morning bread spread through the streets. The vigils returned to their stations, tired, smoky from fires, and sometimes bruised from a night's work. They would rest in the barracks until night came again, when the eternal city handed itself back to them, to walk its shadows, douse its flames, and face whatever the dark might hold. For most Romans, their work was invisible, but without them, the city's nights would have been far longer, far more dangerous, and far less free. Part 3. The Sewers of Rome, Guardians of the Cloaca Maxima. Beneath the marble forums and bustling markets of ancient Rome lay another city, one that most Romans preferred not to think about. It was dark, damp, and smelled of the waste of a million people. Yet without it, Rome would not have been Rome. This was the realm of the Cloaca Maxima, the great sewer, and the men who maintained it. The Cloaca Maxima was one of Rome's engineering marvels, an ancient drainage system originally built centuries before the empire's height, designed to carry stormwater and sewage out of the city and into the Tiber River. Over time, it became far more than a drainage ditch. It was a vast network of tunnels beneath the streets, some high enough to walk through, others so tight a man had to crawl. It fell to a small, specialized group of workers to keep this hidden lifeline functioning. They had no official title that earned glory and inscriptions, but their work was vital. Without them, filth would back up into the streets, diseases would spread unchecked, and Rome's shining image as the queen of cities would crumble. The men who ventured into the Cloaca Maxima were usually those with few other options: freedmen, desperate laborers, or men sent there as a form of punishment. They worked in darkness, lit only by small oil lamps, wading through waist-deep filth, clearing blockages of silt, debris, and worse. The air was thick with the stench of rot, and the tunnels echoed with the drip of water and the occasional skitter of rats. These workers learned the sewer's map like the veins of their own bodies. They knew where a sharp turn might hide a buildup that could cause flooding during heavy rain, or where a collapsed wall might have diverted water into an unsuspecting district. In the rainy season, their job was especially dangerous. Sudden floods could sweep a man away in moments, drowning him before he reached the surface. One of their key tools was a long hooked pole, used to snag debris and pull it toward them for removal. They also carried baskets to collect solid waste and haul it out for disposal above ground. Sometimes, they had to climb down through vertical shafts that connected street-level drains to the tunnels below. Slick, narrow spaces that could be deadly if the latter failed. Occasionally, their work led to strange discoveries. Rings, coins, and even stolen goods sometimes found their way into the sewers, washed down from street drains. There were rumors, whispered, never spoken too loudly, of bodies found in the tunnels, either dumped there after a crime or washed in from elsewhere. The health risks were constant. Skin infections, respiratory illness from the fumes, and parasites were all part of the job. And yet, without complaint, these men kept the system flowing. Rome's public baths, fountains, and latrines depended on them, even if the citizens who used those luxuries never gave a thought to the men in the darkness below. Working in the Cloaca Maxima also had an unspoken hierarchy. Veterans knew the easiest routes to avoid the worst filth, while newcomers were sent to the foulest sections. There were superstitions, too, whispered warnings about spirits that lingered in the tunnels, the ghosts of workers who never made it out, or ancient gods of the underworld who disliked being disturbed. At times, the sewer workers found themselves cooperating with the vigils, the night watch, especially when a blockage threatened to flood an entire street. Fires, thieves, and crime made headlines in the city, but a backed-up sewer could cause just as much chaos in its own, far less glamorous way. When their shift was done, these men emerged from the ground covered in grime, their tunics stained and their skin raw from the work. They would wash themselves as best they could, eat and rest, until the next day brought another descent into the tunnels. No triumphal arch was ever built for them. No marble statue bears their names. Yet, in a way, they were among the truest guardians of Rome. For while legions defended the empire's borders and senators argued in marble halls, these nameless laborers defended the city from its own waste, keeping the heart of Rome beating clean enough for life to flourish above. And so, as the final echoes of our journey through Rome begin to fade, a quiet truth rises to the surface, one that even the grandest marble columns cannot overshadow. The Rome we imagine from paintings, documentaries, and school books, gleaming white temples, orderly streets, triumphal arches, was never the full reality. It was a city of dual faces. One face beamed with imperial splendor, the other bore the weary lines of toil. For every emperor who basked in the cheers of the crowd, there were thousands, nameless, unseen, whose hands and backs supported the empire in silence. Their names were not etched into stone. Their likenesses were not preserved in statues. Yet without them, the machinery of Rome would have seized, its proud image crumbling into dust. Think for a moment about the aqueduct keepers. We have spoken of them before. Solitary figures pacing the length of massive stone channels that stretched across the hills. Their job was not glamorous. It was grueling, lonely, and essential. A single crack in the channel could drain miles of water, turning fountains dry and leaving neighborhoods thirsty. By torchlight or under the baking sun, these workers trudged mile after mile, their ears tuned to the faint sound of dripping where no water should drip. Few Romans ever saw them. Fewer still thanked them. Yet the baths, fountains, and even private homes of the wealthy depended entirely on their vigilance. Or picture the sewer cleaners in the Cloaca Maxima, one of the oldest engineering marvels in the city, a network of tunnels that carried away the waste of hundreds of thousands. By day, the streets bustled above. By night, these men waded waist-deep in filth, scraping away blockages and shoveling sediment to keep the city from drowning in its own refuse. They were as vital as any soldier standing on the frontier, but history forgot them. Then there were the bakers who rose before the dawn, their ovens glowing like beacons in the dark. The city awoke to the smell of bread, but the work began in the hours when the streets were empty, when even the watchmen leaned against their spears and fought to stay awake. The bakers' arms ached from kneading, their brows dripped with sweat from the heat of the oven, but the bread they made fed everyone, from senators to street beggars, and the torchbearers, an image often ignored by modern retellings. In an age before street lamps, a nighttime journey through Rome's twisting lanes could be treacherous. Wealthy patrons hired torchbearers to light their way. It was humble work, but dangerous. Shadows in the dark could hide thieves or worse. Yet without these human lights, the city's elite would have been prisoners of their own villas after sunset. There was even a kind of silent army in Rome, not soldiers with swords, but slaves trained to maintain the endless functions of daily life. They tended gardens, repaired roofs, fetched water, polished bronze, and swept marble floors until they shone. They were expected to be invisible. They were heard only when summoned, their labor absorbed into the background hum of a city that never stopped moving. When we think of Rome, we are quick to imagine its victories, the legions marching in step, the orators speaking in the forum, the emperors raising their hands to address the crowd. But just as vital to Rome's survival was the dull rhythm of daily maintenance. Every empire needs its heroes, but it also needs its caretakers. And Rome had countless more of the latter than the former. The beauty of their contribution lies in its constancy. There were no festivals to celebrate the man who repaired a collapsed roof beam before the winter rains came, nor songs for the woman who tended the public latrine and kept it from disease. Yet in truth, Rome's splendor was not just marble and gold. It was the endurance of those who labored without applause. Even the monuments themselves required this invisible army. Columns had to be scrubbed of soot, statues cleaned of bird droppings, and paving stones reset after heavy rains shifted them. The Tiber flooded often, carrying silt and debris into the city's lowest quarters, and someone, not a senator, not a general, had to shovel it away. The irony is that these people lived in a kind of parallel Rome. While the elite walked through grand porticos and attended lavish feasts, the workers saw the city's underbelly, its dripping tunnels, its ash-streaked workshops, its cramped back rooms where the smell of sweat and oil mingled. Their Rome was one of constant labor, but it was also one of quiet pride. For even if the city did not thank them, they knew the truth. Without their hands, Rome would have fallen long before history ever wrote its name. The modern visitor to Rome can still see traces of them, not in statues or inscriptions, but in the worn grooves on the steps where countless laborers' feet climbed, in the faint soot stains high on the walls of ancient bakeries, in the maintenance pathways along the aqueducts that still cross the countryside. The stones remember, even if we do not. And so, when we think of Rome's greatness, we should also think of these invisible pillars. For an empire is not sustained by glory alone. It is sustained by endurance. And endurance is the domain of the ordinary, of the hands that carry water, the backs that bear burdens, the feet that never stop moving. In that quiet, enduring labor lies the real miracle of Rome. Not just the engineering brilliance of its aqueducts or the imposing strength of its walls, but the human dedication that kept them standing. The grandeur of the empire was built on their silent devotion, and while history forgot their names, the city they sustained, in all its glory and all its grime, was their monument. So take a breath. Let the marble temples fade from your mind for a moment, and imagine the hands that polished them. Let the roar of the crowd in the Circus Maximus grow quiet, and hear instead the scrape of a shovel in the Cloaca Maxima. That sound, too, was Rome, and without it, there would have been no empire to remember at all. The streets of Rome, so often imagined as pristine paths of marble, were in truth rivers of humanity. From dawn's first light until the deep hours of night, the city moved, an endless choreography of people fulfilling roles that rarely made it into grand histories. Senators and generals left their names etched in stone. These others left theirs in the worn cobblestones, in the faint grooves of wooden cartwheels, in the lingering smell of baked bread drifting down the narrow lanes. If you stood in the Forum in the year 100 CE, you might see a triumphant procession march past, all gold and scarlet banners. But turn down a side alley, and you'd find a different Rome. One where a boy balanced a basket of figs on his head, weaving through the crowd. where a washerwoman stooped over a wooden tub, her hands red and raw from the cold water, where a lamplighter climbed a ladder at dusk, tending to the city's fragile network of oil lamps. These were the lifelines of Rome, the everyday motions that kept its vast body alive. Without them, the city would have been a monument without a heartbeat. And yet, most of these people lived and died without recognition. Their graves were modest, if they had graves at all. Their names, if remembered, lingered only in family stories, stories that vanished when the next generation was swallowed by the city's endless hunger for labor. We often speak of Rome's power, its roads stretching across continents, its aqueducts carrying water for miles. But power, in truth, was as much about the ordinary hands that built, maintained, and repaired these wonders. A stonemason in a dusty tunic, balancing on a wooden scaffold, might never know his face would never be carved into marble, but without his work, the grand temple above him would crumble. The markets, too, were quiet miracles of survival. In the open-air stalls, traders argued over prices in a dozen tongues. A fisherman from Ostia laid out his catch at dawn, hoping to sell before the heat spoiled it. A farmer from the surrounding countryside sold olives, the green and black fruit glistening under the morning sun. And at the edges, street urchins darted in and out, snatching crumbs, their bare feet quick and silent. All of this, the noise, the smells, the movement, was as much Rome as the marble facades. The empire was not just a political and military giant. It was a living, breathing organism. And in that organism, the smallest, most invisible parts were often the most vital. There were also the quiet acts of courage that never made it into any scroll or inscription. A mother giving her last piece of bread to her child. A neighbor tending to the sick during a fever outbreak, knowing it might cost their life. A slave carefully saving coins, one by one, for the distant hope of freedom. These moments, too, were Rome. And yet, history has a way of forgetting. It remembers battles, decrees, and emperors, but it rarely remembers the day a cobbler worked through the night to repair the sandals of a soldier leaving at dawn, or the moment a street cleaner pulled a child out of the path of a runaway cart. These acts, though small in the grand tapestry of empire, were the stitches that kept it from unraveling. When we picture Rome, we tend to see it in its most dramatic form: a chariot race, a triumphal arch, a marble Senate chamber. But the truth is that the soul of Rome lived in its quiet, unrecorded hours, in the clatter of early morning as the bakers kneaded dough, in the low murmur of conversation at the public baths, in the weary steps of the night watchman making his rounds with a torch. And as the centuries passed, these humble rhythms continued, even as the empire changed. The emperors came and went. The borders shifted, but still the same motions filled the streets. Hands passing bread, voices haggling over prices, feet shuffling along stone-paved roads. It is tempting to think of history as the story of great men, but the truth is gentler and more complicated. Rome was not simply ruled, it was sustained. Sustained by those who could not afford to rest, who woke before sunrise, whose labor never brought glory, but always brought life. If you close your eyes now and imagine the city, try not to see only the grand. Picture the little things: the uneven breath of a worker hauling a water jar up the hill, the flicker of a candle in a cramped room, the smell of fish and wet clay in the morning market. These too were Rome, as real and enduring as the Colosseum or the Pantheon. And perhaps, in the end, that is the truest legacy. The marble has cracked, The aqueducts have fallen silent in many places. The great processions are long gone. But the rhythm of ordinary life, work, care, resilience, continues in every city that stands today. We are all, in some way, living in the echo of Rome's forgotten heartbeat. The sun sets slowly over Rome, and the shadows stretch long across the worn stones of the Forum. The air cools, carrying the mingled scents of cooking fires and the faint tang of the Tiber. The city that once roared with 1,000 voices begins to soften into the gentle murmur of evening. Imagine walking along a narrow street now, the crowds thinning, the market stalls closing one by one. A vendor sweeps away the last traces of the day, crushed grapes, wilted herbs, fragments of bread. A potter stacks his unsold wares, each one marked with the imprint of his hands. The light falls in golden slants through the spaces between tall, leaning buildings, painting the stones in warm, fleeting color. In the distance, the temples and public buildings stand as they have for centuries, their marble catching the last glow before night. But even these grand structures seem quieter now, as if they too are exhaling after the long day. The hum of the streets slows to a whisper. Somewhere a mother calls her children in from play. A dog trots home, tail low, its shadow stretching ahead. The lamplighter makes his rounds, touching flame to oil-soaked wicks, one by one, scattering little pockets of light into the growing dark. This is the Rome most never picture, not the Rome of spectacle and conquest, but the Rome of ordinary endings. The Rome where life continues quietly after the noise fades. And as you walk, you might pass doorways where voices murmur in low conversation, sharing news of the day, or perhaps only simple comforts. You might hear the faint notes of a lyre drifting from an open window, the melody fragile but beautiful against the silence of the street. Beyond the walls of the city, fields lie still under the deepening twilight. Farmers who came to market earlier in the day now return to their villages, their carts rattling softly over the worn roads. The countryside darkens, and the stars begin to emerge, scattered like grains of salt across the deep velvet sky. It's in these moments, these quiet transitions, that the heartbeat of Rome can still be felt. Not in the triumphs carved into stone, but in the simple fact that the city endures another day. The same pattern has played out for centuries. In the days of Augustus, and long after his name became only a whisper of history, Rome ended its days like this, with the hush of twilight, the settling of dust, the promise of rest. Even in the empire's slow decline, when the weight of years began to show in cracked walls and faded mosaics, the rhythm of evening remained. People still baked bread, still mended clothes, still told stories by lamplight. Empires might crumble in the grand sweep of history, but for the people who lived within them, life continued in its small, essential ways. If you could stand on one of Rome's 7 hills and watch the city at nightfall, you would see a vast patchwork of light and shadow. Fires glowing in courtyards, the soft shimmer of the moon on rooftops, and far off, the silent ribbon of the Tiber, glinting silver as it winds toward the sea. Listen closely, and you might hear the gentle rhythm of footsteps on stone, a reminder that somewhere, even now, someone is making their way home. And as the city settles deeper into the night, the stars grow brighter overhead. The same stars that shone on Julius Caesar, on the slaves who built the aqueducts, on the children who played in the shadow of the Colosseum. Time passes, names fade, but the sky remains, a silent witness to all that has been. The Rome of this moment is not the Rome of war and glory, but the Rome of sleep. of dreams carried by thousands of people across 1,000 rooms. Some dream of better days, some dream of home, some simply drift in the quiet safety of the night. If you could walk through the sleeping city, you would find every kind of life resting here. In the wealthier districts, homes stand silent, their courtyards perfumed with night-blooming flowers. In the crowded insula, families sleep huddled together in small rooms, the air warm with the presence of many bodies. Even the stray animals find places to curl up, beneath market stalls, in the corners of empty temples, in the shadow of walls that have stood for generations. The empire will continue to rise and fall in cycles, as all things do. But tonight, that does not matter. Tonight is simply night, and Rome, in all its vastness, breathes together as one. As the hours stretch on, the deep stillness settles, and even the lamplighters have gone home. The last embers in the hearths fade to soft, glowing coals. Somewhere, a late breeze drifts in from the countryside, carrying the scent of damp earth and olive trees. The city sleeps, holding within it all the countless lives that make up its history, known and unknown, remembered and forgotten. And in this quiet, it is easier to see that the heart of Rome was never only in its power, but in its people. They walked these streets, they touched these walls, they watched the same moon, and though their names may be gone, their lives left an imprint. Not one you can always see in ruins or read in books, but one you can feel in the rhythm of the city, in the hum of life that carries forward even now. And as we leave Rome behind in this story, perhaps we carry a little of that with us. The understanding that history is not only the grand events, but the countless small moments that make them possible. That every age, no matter how mighty, is lived one day at a time, in the hands of ordinary people. The lamps grow dim, the city dreams. And so, perhaps, should you.